The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Our aim is to explore the fringe, lost civilizations, alternative science, the paranormal, and much more. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live or future guests via email or the live chat room. And remember to subscribe to us on iTunes. And now welcome to this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And I am your host, Soraya. On this edition of Where Did the Road Go? It is actually Aleister Crowley's birthday. And in celebration of that, we brought back Joseph Phoebus. Are you there with us, Joseph?
Hey, how are you doing? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
All right. And the last time we had you on back in June, people really positively responded to it. A lot of people don't know much about Crowley, and we're really thrilled to find out so much information.
Oh, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, there's a lot we didn't get to last time you were here, so this seems like the perfect date to do it.
That's true. Happy Crowley Mass.
And he was born, do you know what year he was born in offhand?
It was 1875. So he would have been 138 today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And he died in 1945?
1947. Yeah.
1947,
so was,
right.
Yeah, 72 years old. So yeah, he really lived to a ripe old age. And he was productive all the way up until the end, working, I think the last thing he was really working on was the Book of Thoth, which was a, stunning book. It's still in print. It's an amazing text that I think is part of every occultist library, the Book of Thoth, which, of course, is the book that goes along with the tarot deck. The tarot deck called the Thoth deck, which he commissioned from Lady Frida Harris to paint, and he gave her direction on what to paint on the cards. And that's probably one of the most famous decks today. And he was working on that right up until, well, the book at least, he was working on right up until the end of his life. A lot of people say that he died a drug addict and, was poor and all this stuff. But, I mean, he was really, like William S. Burroughs, who used heroin, until very late in life. Crowley was very productive and creative and very much conscious and hardworking until the end.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors about his death that are pretty ridiculous.
Right. Right, yeah, there's the one saying where he said, "I am perplexed" or something, but nobody was actually in the room with him when he died. He was staying at well, they call it a boarding house, but it's kind of like it was an old folks home, but it was a small house. There was a few other people living there, intellectuals that he used to play chess with and so forth, and he kept he was at that time the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, and he had the lion's share of the order's money in a strongbox under his bed.
Wow.
So he didn't really touch that. He kept it for the order. So it wasn't like he was struggling. He was living in a very nice place and actually overlooking the cliffs that he climbed as a child and as a young adult. So the people that were with him at the time of his death, Patricia McAlpine, she said that he was very happy in the days before his death, and there were children, including his child, Aleister Ataturk, was there, and he died quietly, probably in his sleep.
All right. Well, you want to give some people a little background on who you are before we go on? In case they didn't hear the first interview?
Right. Well, I'm a Thelemite and a priest of Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, which is a Thelemic religion, and that is sort of exists within the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is an order that Aleister Crowley founded. Well, he kind of inherited it and restructured it and rewrote all the rituals back in the early 19-teens. And let's see, I've been a member of Ordo Templi Orientis since 1999, so coming up on 15 years.
Wow.
And before that, I was a magic practitioner for another 10 years, since basically my own adolescence. And I'm also, an artist, kind of an amateur artist. I do photography and computer art, as well as some painting, and I'm also currently getting my bachelor's degree in physics. So.
Wow. And you also had the Aleister Crowley for President 2012 page.
Yes, that's right, ac2012.com, and I was trying to help elect Aleister Crowley for President of the United States, so any problems you're experiencing right now, don't blame me. I voted for Aleister Crowley.
All right, so now let's, you mentioned the cliffs that he died in sight of, and he was an avid mountain climber. I don't think we got into that last time much.
Yeah, that's true. He was in the first European party to attempt K2, which is the second highest, I believe it's the second highest mountain in the world, Kanchenjunga. And he was an avid mountain climber and had a lot of, he developed a lot of techniques which are still in use among mountain climbers. And in fact, I've even met people who were into mountain climbing that knew about Crowley because of his mountain climbing and didn't know anything about the rest of his accomplishments, which is kind of funny. But yeah, so he was an accomplished mountain climber. He was also pretty good at chess and poetry. So.
Okay, and he also now did he actually work as a spy for the British intelligence?
Well, it seems that he did. I don't know. I think that there's evidence that you have to kind of weigh because there's no definitive statement out there as far as I know that he was from British intelligence or anything saying that he was, but the evidence seems pretty compelling. If you look at that book, Secret Agent 666, there's quite a bit of speculation in that book, but there's also a fair amount of solid information, and I think the author does a fairly good job of identifying when he's sort of speculating and when he's basing his stuff on facts. But it seems pretty likely. He certainly was in favor of the Allies, and his travels and the locations where he was certainly suggest that he was doing things for the Allies, and there were some things that he definitely did. The question is whether he did them kind of just because he really liked the Allies versus whether he was actually hired by British intelligence to do it. But I think that the evidence is pretty strong. In fact, I think that there's, Crowley claims that he actually came up with the V for victory symbol, which, it kind of became popularized as a peace symbol in the 60s with your fingers making the V. That Churchill actually got it through the MI5 eventually from Crowley. And Crowley, the way he talks about the V for victory symbol is that it's a magical foil to the swastika. And if you look at some of the Golden Dawn magical formulas as well as Crowley's writings, I think it's pretty plain that it would be, it would function that way magically, in the sense that the swastika can be connected to the dying and resurrecting God, or even to Isis, while the V for victory is connected to Apophis or Typhon, which is the destroyer. So the idea being that Typhon would destroy the energy that was being invoked by the Nazis. So
fascinating.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned Thelema. Do you want to tell people a little bit about these orders and what they were and how Crowley got involved?
Sure. Well, Thelema is the religion or religious philosophy that Aleister Crowley founded in 1904, and basically the word Thelema is a Greek word, and it means will. And the basic teaching of this is, as you've probably heard the phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," and "Love is the law, love under will." These two phrases both come from a text called the Book of the Law, which is a text that Aleister Crowley received after performing a ritual in Egypt in 1904. So he's not the author per se, but he received it through an automatic writing kind of process. And this idea, Thelema, is one that kind of overturns all of the old kind of religious ideas and philosophical ideas of the last roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years, all of which kind of tend to externalize divinity and establish moral codes that everybody has to live by Thelema kind of overturns that and says that the divine is within you, and you have to look inward to discover the right kinds of actions for yourself and kind of manifest your inmost nature rather than adhering to some externally imposed slave morality, so to speak. So this was a religion that Aleister Crowley founded in 1904, and then he went on to kind of take magical orders that existed then, including Ordo Templi Orientis and the Golden Dawn, and he wanted to kind of recalibrate them to be to have Thelema at their core. And the Golden Dawn did not do that, and eventually, actually, the Golden Dawn kind of fell apart. I gather that some people have kind of resurrected in recent years, but at that time, Crowley started his own order called the AA, which structurally is very similar to the Golden Dawn, but he's completely rewritten everything to be focused on this law of Thelema, which establishes the liberty of the individual and their sovereignty and divinity. And he also took the rituals of Ordo Templi Orientis, which at that time was a Freemasonic order, kind of like the Scottish Rite or something like that. Mm-hmm. Ordo Templi Orientis was a rite of Freemasonry that Crowley kind of took and revised everything to be focused on this law of Thelema. And he established, I think, one or two other orders. One was called the Order of Thelemites, and I think that maybe one or two others. But those kind of fell by the wayside, and he really put all of his energy into the AA and the Ordo Templi Orientis, and both of those survive to this day.
And how did the people who were involved with those orders feel about Crowley at the time?
Oh, well, it depends on who you ask, I suppose. That they some of the people liked him and really kind of followed along with his work very closely. Like Frida Harris, for example, was very very interested in Crowley's work and was very careful when she was doing the paintings for the Thoth Tarot. She followed everything that he said about those and had to remake the paintings over and over again in some cases to satisfy his exacting demands. But others either, for example, Norman Mudd proclaimed himself the true beast of the apocalypse and said that Crowley had lost contact with his holy guardian angel and things like that, and so kind of went off in his own direction. And Crowley, he had a very big personality, and he had a tendency to have falling outs with people. So he, for example, JFC Fuller, and JFC Fuller was a great Thelemite of the day and one of his best students, and they had a falling out because Crowley, was nervous about defending. Oh, his name is escaping me at the moment. One of his friends who was in court for in Britain for being homosexual, which was illegal in Britain at the time, and Crowley would not go and testify in his favor, which was something that Crowley was really torn about. But in the end, JFC Fuller ended his friendship with Crowley over it. Crowley had his ego problems and definitely had personality conflicts with a number of people, for sure. And I think that his failures as a human being kind of are important to remember about him, that he wasn't some kind of perfect prophet by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, not that anybody would ever think he was, given his reputation, but I don't think sometimes people talk about Crowleyanity or people following Crowley, trying to be like Crowley, and I don't know if any of those people exist. But if they do, I think it's important to remember that Crowley was not a perfect person. He was very, very flawed, and he acknowledged this. And I think that part of the thing that's interesting about the philosophy that he proposed was that it doesn't demand that anybody be perfect. That we all go through life making mistakes and trying to find out what we're really about, and that's just part of the human condition and part of reality. So
one of the things I found interesting when I read his autobiography was that he did do that. He acknowledged his mistakes and would just come right out and be like, yeah, well, that was a mistake. I did that wrong. I shouldn't have done this. If I knew better, I wouldn't have done that.
Right, exactly right. And he wrote in this book called De Lege Libellum, he said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, that, if somebody as flawed as I can attain to this degree of receiving wisdom, then think, what someone like yourself, who's so much better than me, can do.
How do you think pop culture has treated him overall?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, Crowley is certainly very influential in pop culture. I mean, you can see his influence throughout rock music, for example, and throughout all of the movements in the 60s and 70s, and that whole idea of the sexual revolution and just being able to do what you want to do and finding yourself, which was so popular back in those days. Our culture, it's really hard to estimate how much our culture has been influenced by Aleister Crowley because his impact has been so deep and so broad. But at the same time, it seems like a lot of pop culture has kind of maligned Crowley and really spread a lot of false myths about him because he had such he was a very controversial figure, so people have a tendency to kind of believe anything they hear about him.
That he seemed to like adding fuel to that fire too.
Definitely. I mean, he was, I don't think he was the person who originated the phrase, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I think that might have been Barnum and Bailey, but Crowley certainly lived that philosophy. And anytime he got any publicity, he milked it, whether it was good or bad. I think towards the end, he may have begun to kind of realize that maybe it went a little too far and maybe people got too bad of an impression of him. But I think over the long term, I think that now, for example, people are starting to realize that there's more to him than the tabloid stories. And I think that because there was so much vitriol written about him, in part, that's what's made him interesting enough that people still keep coming back to him now. So it's kind of a mixed blessing that pop culture has both been deeply influenced by him and has also treated him rather, in my opinion, unfairly.
Have you ever seen the movie Crowley that Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden did?
I really should see it. I kind of tried to watch it.
It's terrible. It is so bad.
I've heard it's funny as long as you don't try to imagine that it has anything to do with Crowley's actual life.
Yeah.
But I couldn't make it through it.
It's definitely a Mystery Science Theater type movie.
Right.
And that's someone who had a professed interest in Crowley, and even when I talked to him about it, he didn't, as much as he was interested in it, he didn't seem to know very much about Crowley, deep down, just like pop culture and
right. Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of these
I was a little disappointed when I realized that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the kind of folks who've been rock stars and so forth that have been into Crowley, I think that they suffered from a lack of availability of some of Crowley's work back in the 60s and 70s. There wasn't much out there, and what was there, I mean, Crowley's not easy to kind of digest, and for people who are, really focused on their music careers and not so much on, learning the intricacies of 19th century English usage, it may be kind of difficult to penetrate his work. I certainly don't imagine Ozzy Osbourne as a scholar of any kind. So I think it's tough for them, and I think that they kind of had to rely on what they heard about Crowley from what journalists or so-called journalists would write about him.
Yeah.
You look at the lyrics from Ozzy Osbourne's Mr. Crowley, which is totally the wrong pronunciation of his name in the first place. Mr. Crowley, Ozzy Osbourne. It's just like you don't even know what he's talking about in there. It's like nothing has any relation to Crowley's life. So anyway, yeah.
It didn't. I wouldn't expect that much from Ozzy. I expected a little more from Bruce because he always, took Maiden in a more intellectual direction.
That's true. Good point. That's true.
And he seemed to almost feel sorry for Crowley, and it was kind of like, that's not. I don't think that works,
No, exactly right. Yeah, Crowley had a great life, and he was very happy throughout his life. So yeah, there's really nothing to feel sorry for him about it, unless So you're like, I guess the biography out there by John Simons, I forget the name of it, it brings up a lot of these myths that have perpetuated that the things that kind of Simons seems to have just made up. And so, when you have something out there that looks like a legitimate biography that's saying these things, and there are, even now you can find, biographical films for television that have been made and that kind of thing that perpetuate all these myths. So I can see where somebody might be confused if they hadn't really delved into Crowley's actual writings. Or some of the more recent biographies, which are really well researched, like Perturabo by Richard Kaczynski, or the one I think it's called A Life of Aleister Crowley by Tobias Churton. Oh, Tobias Churton has another book coming out about Crowley, actually, which is focused on the years 1930 to 1932 when Aleister Crowley was in Berlin, which would fit right into your interest about his spy work, because that's 1930 to 1932. Crowley's in Berlin right during the time that Hitler is rising to power. So that's going to be a really interesting book. I'm sure it's coming out. I think it's available for pre-order right now.
Wow. Okay.
So I'll send you a link if you want to put it up.
Sure. Absolutely. Now, one of the ways that he did have kind of a big influence on our culture, and a lot of people, I'm seeing it pop up more and more in conspiracy theories, is through Jack Parsons.
Jack Parsons. He was the rocket scientist who founded what's now called JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories. It was originally called, I think, Aerojet, back in the day when, at the time, the idea of rockets was kind of a fad thing. So serious companies that wanted to be taken to get funding from big companies didn't use the word rocket because it kind of sounded science fiction like. They used the word jet instead, because a rocket engine is a kind of jet engine. So yeah, Parsons started this company called Aerojet, and later became Jet Propulsion Laboratories, which is now part of NASA. And really, Jack Parsons, he had ideas for rocket fuel, which are still being used today, and really his formulation for rocket fuel kicked off the space race for us. We would not have made it to the moon without him. So there's now a crater on the moon named after him, and Jack Parsons was a dedicated Thelemite, student of Aleister Crowley, although Crowley wasn't a huge fan of Jack Parsons. I think he kind of thought that Jack Parsons was foolish, and Jack Parsons was friends with L. Ron Hubbard, and Crowley didn't like L. Ron Hubbard and thought he was kind of a con artist.
There, go figure.
And Jack Parsons was also lodge master of Agapé Lodge number 2 in the Pasadena, California area, and that was one of, I think there were only 2 lodges in the New World at that time. I think there was just the one in California, and then there was one in British Columbia.
Well, I see a lot in conspiracy theories popping up about how NASA is still following these magical rituals that were originally set in place by Parsons through Crowley, et cetera, et cetera.
That would be so awesome.
Yes, it was. But you got what's his name from the Enterprise mission? Did the Face on Mars book?
Oh, I don't know about this.
His name's on the tip of my tongue, but anyway, he's always looking at these ritualistic things that he claims NASA's doing using certain dates and he thinks everything they do is a magical ritual that they've hidden from the public, and it kind of goes back to Parsons.
Would that it were so. Well, actually, I went and visited JPL once, actually as part of my schooling. As a physics student, I had the opportunity to participate in a little contest, and it was kind of an academic contest, and the winners got to go to JPL and spend 3 days touring the thing and doing more educational projects while there. And I kind of got the sense that, I mean, they definitely knew when they were doing the tour, that they had a plaque out there, dedicated to Jack Parsons and the other two guys that were working with him, and they definitely know about Parsons' work. But I kind of get the sense that they kind of mock his interests in the occult, and they don't really understand it. So I seriously doubt that, other than maybe there are individuals who might have those kinds of interests at NASA or just about anywhere really, but I don't think as an organization they're doing anything like that. Although Jack Parsons back in the day certainly did. When every time he did a rocket test, he would invoke Pan. And that's kind of the thing that they'll mock him for today at these scientific institutions, is for doing that. But I think probably a lot of those scientists secretly in their mind's eye are doing their own version of whatever kind of prayer they might engage in,
right.
Whether they're doing it religiously or just as a kind of superstitious luck thing. And that's kind of, I think that's where Parsons was coming from, and the fact that he was kind of invoking his own genius and hoping that he would become inspired to build the better rocket. So.
And that was Richard Hoagland, who runs the
okay.
Enterprise mission.
Okay, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, he very, very big proponent of lots of artificial structures around the solar system. Some of his work is very interesting. Some of it you start thinking he just sees artificial structures everywhere.
Right.
But he actually worked for NASA and Cronkite back in the day too, so he has some familiarity with the stuff. Now, go on.
Oh, I just was saying that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that.
And he has a book out called Dark Mission or something like that. That's about supposedly the secret space project NASA is involved in, and it's very ritualistic and stuff like that.
Well, if they were doing stuff that was related to Aleister Crowley's work, what they would be doing is somehow helping people to turn inward to find their own inmost nature and the light of the divine inside themselves, and I think that would be pretty cool, but I don't think that they're doing that.
No.
And, if the government was really into Aleister Crowley's ideas, they'd be encouraging people to take psychedelics in order to find themselves, and I don't see them doing that. So.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, because that also Crowley, as you said, objected to his friendship with Hubbard, and Hubbard's the one who started Dianetics and Scientology.
That's right. Yeah. So Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons' wife at the time had kind of a little swinging thing going on between the three of them, and I guess they did the Babylon working, which was this ritual that Jack Parsons was trying to evoke Babylon into a living person, and Aleister Crowley wrote at one point, I think he was writing to W.T. Smith, and he said, "I get fairly frantic at these goats." And so Aleister Crowley's over there in England fretting about this relationship that's developed between Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard had not, by that time, founded Scientology, but Aleister Crowley already regarded him as a con artist. And of course, then later, when L. Ron Hubbard did found Scientology, you can see some of the influence of Crowley's works in Scientology. But it's very, very distorted and very kind of stripped of its essence. A lot of the technique is there, but none of the message of individual liberty and individual sovereignty and divinity. None of that is there. It's all just these techniques for kind of brainwashing, I think.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Scientology, and actually L. Ron Hubbard, there's one interview where L. Ron Hubbard talks about Aleister Crowley, and I think he mispronounces his name, talks about a book that Crowley didn't write, and then says, that, oh yes, Crowley was my personal friend, and then he ends the interview by saying, yes, Crowley was very, very something or other. It's like, what? So yeah, even though Crowley didn't like Hubbard, and Hubbard probably never even corresponded with Crowley, that didn't stop Hubbard from trying to ride on Crowley's coattails a little bit.
Yeah, and Parsons died under fairly mysterious circumstances too, didn't he?
Right. He died in an explosion of mercury-2 fulminate, which interestingly, if you, I'm sure you or some of your listeners have watched the show Breaking Bad. I think it's in the first season. Walter White in Breaking Bad walks into this drug kingpin's lair and has a bag of what looks like crystal meth, but it's actually mercury-2 fulminates, and he takes out a piece and throws it and explodes. Well, that's the stuff that Jack Parsons died in the explosion. I don't remember what year it was, but apparently he was working in his garage on some new formulation of rocket fuel and dropped some of that stuff and it exploded. Now, Marjorie Cameron swears to this day that Jack Parsons would never have been so careless. Mm-hmm. So there is some question, and I'm sure that Jack Parsons had a variety of political interests, and he was certainly a wild card. And having founded JPL, I'm sure that he had I know he had an FBI file on him. So I think there's a legitimate question as to whether or not there could have been foul play involved with his death, but there's no evidence to really say for sure one way or the other.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned in the beginning of the show the tarot deck that Crowley had made. Now, Crowley completely reconfigured this deck, didn't he?
Yeah, he changed some things. The Golden Dawn had switched a couple of the cards, and then Crowley switched a couple more based on some of the verses in the Book of the Law, which I mentioned he received. That actually brings up some stuff related to the tarot that Crowley switched some symbolism around in a way that seemed to make more sense. It's pretty technical matter, but I think that the most important thing that he changed about the tarot was in the Thoth Tarot, we see a pictorial representation of all of the sort of mythos of Thelema, the religion that he founded. And it's laid out throughout the deck, and it's in all the symbols in the deck. And Freda Harris was an astounding artist, and her work is just amazing. And actually, 10 of the, I think it's 10, maybe it's 9 of the original paintings of the cards are currently on display in Venice at the Biennale, which is an arts festival that happens every 2 years. And they've just been, the whole series of 72 paintings has just been restored and conserved by the Ordo Templi Orientis, which I think they spent about $50,000, taking off acidic glue and things like that were starting to eat through the paintings, and they've got them all in cases now, and they're well preserved. But yeah, there's 10 of them on display in Venice right now, and it's a beautiful deck. I really think it's the best deck that exists right now, bar none, just in terms of its visual beauty, this symbolism that's included in every card that you have to kind of, if you look at the artwork and you look at Crowley's description of the card in his Book of Thoth, he explains just about every brush stroke and how it's symbolic in some way related to the symbolism of the card.
Wow. And I always thought it was Thoth rather than Thoth.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't speak Egyptian. It's it's named after the Egyptian god Thoth, or Tahuti, or Thoth, or Tot. I'm not exactly sure how the ancient Egyptians pronounced it, but he's the ibis-headed god of magic and of writing, and that's who the deck is named after.
Okay, and the book that he wrote about it is actually a fairly thick book with essays on most of the major cards.
That's right. Yeah, the Book of Thoth, and it's available really inexpensively right now. I think you can get it for $10 or less used. And it's a nice book, and it's very very detailed, a lot thicker and more in depth than you typically find with most tarot books that you get with a deck, for example.
Right.
So.
Okay. We're going to take a quick 45-second break, and we're going to be back with Joseph Thebus right after this.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live guests via email or the live chat room. You can also check out our upcoming schedule, blog, links section, book reviews, videos, and links to our Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, and much more. That's wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And we've been talking with Joseph Thebes tonight about Aleister Crowley and some related matters. And it is indeed Crowley's birthday today, at least for another half an hour where we are.
That's right.
And for anyone who doesn't know, he died in 1947, right?
Yep, that's right, 1947.
And was born
1875, so he lived 72 years.
Okay, and so let's get into some of the stranger aspects of his work. Let's talk a little bit about Lamb, L-A-M.
Oh, right. So Lamb, this is, for your listeners, it's this painting that, or actually kind of a drawing that Crowley made, I think it was around 1918. And this drawing, which Crowley eventually gave to Kenneth Grant, the original, Kenneth Grant really kind of popularized the idea that this was a portrait of a gray alien. And for those who've seen the image, there's definitely a striking resemblance to what we now know of as a gray alien. Of course, the first kind of writings about gray aliens came after the drawing.
By quite a bit.
Right. And the interesting thing about this, I have kind of, I think it's a really popular theory that that Lamb is a portrait of an alien or of an entity that Crowley contacted, but I have kind of a different theory, and it's probably less popular, but I think it has a little bit more basis in fact, that this may have been actually a self-portrait or a kind of idealized or spiritual self-portrait of Aleister Crowley. And the reason I say that is there's a few, Crowley has a couple of portraits out there which look very similar to this, self-portraits that he called self-portraits, where he has these kind of sort of thin and upward slanted eyes and an enlarged forehead. And there's one other one that he has that looks very, very much like a gray also. And I have actually on the AC 2012 site, I have a little analysis of this question and kind of examine some of the evidence. And I present these three portraits next to each other, and you can definitely see a resemblance between the three, two of which he identified as self-portraits. But also the word lamb is, when you see the drawing where Crowley published the drawing in the Equinox, it actually says Lam is a Tibetan word that means the way. Rather than saying Lam is an entity, his name, he says it's a Tibetan word that means the way, and that's what it says sort of in the caption under the drawing. And he actually refers to the drawing to, when he writes to Kenneth Grant, he refers to it as the Lama, which is, if you look at the translation of the original Sanskrit word lama, it means one who goes or one who follows away. So then when you look at some of Crowley's writings, there's references to himself identifying with he that is the way, or who goeth radiant ever upon his way. So there's a lot of references throughout Crowley's writing where he refers to himself or his inmost self, like with a capital S, as being the way, or the one who goes upon the way. And so I think that this portrait that he did of Lam is really kind of a spiritual portrait of what he saw as his spiritual core.
So he never really commented on it?
He never really, he had a little bit of correspondence with Kenneth Grant where he really kind of insults Kenneth Grant for not accepting Crowley's explanation. In fact, he said, here's a quote from Crowley to Kenneth Grant: "This is a terrible defect of your outlook on life. You cannot be content with the simplicity of reality and fact. You have to go off into a pipe dream." So Aleister Crowley told Kenneth Grant, if you guess the name of this drawing, I think that's what it was, if you guess the name of this drawing, I'll give it to you. And Kenneth Grant sent back some essay Rather than just guessing the name, he sent back an essay with all this crazy stuff, and that was kind of Crowley's response about it. But yeah, Crowley was someone who he was trying to make magic more scientific, and I mean, yeah. I don't think he really succeeded, but he was trying. And what he did to do that was he would every time he did a ritual, he would write down what he did, and he would write down the results of that. And this was really important to him because he wanted it to be more like a scientific record that you could go back and look, and somebody else could try to reproduce those results. And there's no mention at this time when he made this drawing. There's no mention of him trying to contact an entity or having contacted an entity called Lam. And there definitely would have been if he had contacted something called Lam. He would have written it down. So that kind of tells me that this is kind of something that Kenneth Grant made up.
Well, the thing I found interesting about it is I don't look at gray aliens as actual aliens. I think there's something from an altered state of consciousness.
Well, that certainly is possible, and it could be that this is kind of a collective unconscious image that we're getting of something that is maybe something that characterizes the core of our individual beings. Because this is like, when Crowley founded Thelema, he really said that this was the beginning of a new aeon, or what also became known in some circles as a new age, or the age of Aquarius. And so it may be that the collective unconscious symbols have changed, and we're now seeing this kind of enlarged-headed, squinty-eyed being, or some of them have large eyes, but in any case, pronounced foreheads or enlarged foreheads. Maybe that's somehow part of our collective unconscious, and we're somehow seeing ourselves in this symbol.
Definitely could be. That's what always struck me interesting about it, is I always wondered if he got it in an altered state, and then it would perhaps connect into what other people are seeing.
Right. Well, he definitely was somebody who frequented altered states of consciousness.
Yes.
Whether it was through meditation or drugs or any means he could get his hands on, he definitely was somebody who would traverse those realms.
Yeah, and people have seen them on DMT trips as well. So.
Right, and I guess at some point you have to ask, to what extent is this, because people have had that suggested to them previously. Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't really matter. I think the important thing is when we see any visions, whether it's being abducted or having a dream or having a hallucinatory experience or what have you, whenever we have these experiences, I think it doesn't really matter whether they exist in some kind of objective reality, if there is such a thing. That's not as important to me as what does it mean? What is it telling us individually, and what can we learn about ourselves and our inmost natures when we have these visions? And what can that tell us about our path and what we should do next in our life?
And let's take a moment to explain to people who Kenneth Grant is, too, since I don't know how well known he really is. If you try to get his books, you're going to be paying quite a bit for any of them.
That's true. Yeah.
Even when they first came out, they were expensive. I have a handful of them, and he seems to have taken magic to in a different direction. He's added a lot of Lovecraftian sort of elements into it, and kind of distorted Crowley's view of things.
Yeah, he really kind of went off and did his own thing, and I think his books are interesting in their own right, but I don't think they elucidate much on Crowley's ideas so much as they kind of it's Kenneth Grant has taken what Crowley has said and completely made it his own animal, and I think that Grant's insistence that he was Crowley's successor back in the day kind of got him in hot water, and he ended up being removed from he was kicked out of the OTO by Carl Germer, and because he really kind of was trying to say that his very peculiar and idiosyncratic brand of Thelema, he was trying to say that was Crowley's Thelema, and I think that anybody who reads Crowley's works and reads Grant's works are going to say, oh, these are two completely different things, and that Grant was clearly influenced by Crowley, but he completely took it in a different direction. Like you say, he incorporated Lovecraftian elements and so forth, which are, fictional, but I guess, whatever works for you. And I think that that's kind of an important facet of Crowley's teaching, is that we all should just, use whatever symbols work for us individually. But then, it's one thing to do that, and then it's another thing to say, well, but this is the magic that Crowley was trying to do, in the first place. So,
now, Crowley also worked with Enochian Magick.
Yes, Crowley and Victor Newberg went to the desert and did the Enochian watchtowers, and they did the exploration of the Enochian aethers.
I want to explain to people a little what that is? Because I'm pretty sure for a lot of people you just spoke another language.
Yes, well, it is another language, really. It's,
true.
Enochian is, it's purported to be the language of the angels, and it was a system that was developed or received by John Dee and Edward Kelly in the I guess it was the 17th century or so. Right. And John Dee was, of course, Elizabeth I's astrologer, and he was as such, he was also kind of one of the key mathematicians, and he helped to revise the calendar in those days to be a little bit more accurate, because the calendar had gotten out of whack, and he helped to fix that. So he was someone who was doing magic and science. That was kind of before the two kind of things split apart a little bit, and he developed or received this system of speaking to the angels, and Aleister Crowley and Victor Newberg used this system to conduct a series of rituals and receive visions, and Crowley recorded it all. And during the course of this, this is all chronicled, by the way, in a book called The Vision and the Voice by Aleister Crowley. And in the midst of all of this, Crowley put the ideas of sex and magic together and performed his first sex magic ritual with Victor Newberg. And of course, Crowley was bisexual, and clearly Newberg was too, or maybe he was homosexual. I don't remember if he was bi or homosexual, but yeah. So they did the first sex magic ritual, and then later Victor Newberg and Aleister Crowley continued to work together. And Victor Newberg was a student in the AA with Aleister Crowley, and Crowley wrote a series of rituals which he kind of performed in England as an attempt to popularize his order, AA. A little bit, and those were the rites of Eleusis, which were sort of inspired by the Eleusinian rites of Greece, the ancient ones, but they're completely different in the sense that Crowley kind of takes this idea of a journey through the underworld as more of an astrological journey, using the symbolism of each of the planets, and sort of showing a progression of dying gods who each have sort of their reign over the earth, and they performed those rituals together. And Victor Newberg, well, the way that it developed was Crowley and Newberg and Layla Waddell, which was another person that Crowley worked with a lot. They had these kind of salons where Crowley would read some poetry, and then Layla Waddell would play violin as she was inspired by the poetry to do, and then Victor Newberg would dance to the violin, kind of an ecstatic dance, until he collapsed. And Crowley kind of saw these as different pathways to ecstatic or religious experience, that you could, using poetry or song, and using music and using dance, or sex, one could inspire states of consciousness that really brought a person outside of themselves, causing the death of the ego and that sense of oneness with all. And so Crowley kind of wanted to incorporate this into a series of dramatic rituals that could be performed for the public. And that's what the rites of Eleusis were. And you can see in each of them, there's one part that is reading poetry. One part is playing violin, and another part is dancing ecstatically. And of course, he and Layla Waddell and Victor Newberg played those parts in the rites. And those rites, it's interesting. I'm kind of going on tangent here, but but the rites are actually now still performed to this day. Crowley wrote them, and he kind of the way he wrote them, it's a little vague as to stage direction and things like that. So people kind of make it their own when they perform them, and they use a lot of times they use the same words, the same lines that he has, but they'll change sort of the setting, or they'll give it a particular theme. And there's one group in Seattle who does the Rites of Eleusis, Aleister Crowley's Rites of Eleusis, but they do the whole thing as rock operas. And those are pretty fun to watch, and I imagine they're a blast to participate in. But you can see those. You do a search on YouTube for Rites of Eleusis or rock opera Aleister Crowley, and you'll find them.
Interesting. Well, we should kind of skipped over the core of the Enochian Magick, though.
Oh, well, I guess basically the idea is that it's this system where you can communicate with angels, and so you can perform rituals that are based on the system that John Dee and Edward Kelly received, and then you have visions where you're on in these etheric planes, and you communicate with various aspects of divinity. And when Crowley and Victor Newberg did it, they received, or Crowley received visions of all 30 aethers, and they very much elaborated on a lot of sort of the, I guess you could say, symbolism of Thelema. And Aleister Crowley said that the vision and the voice, which is the chronicle of their Enochian work, is really second in importance to Thelemites as the Book of the Law. So it's really kind of one of the most important texts that there is, and it kind of elaborates a lot of the metaphysics and the symbolism that is underneath Thelema. So.
And the Enochian language that they had created actually has syntax and shows all the signs of being an actual language too, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I don't have I don't know enough about linguistics to say myself, but that is something that I've heard, that it does have a remarkable degree of kind of validity in terms of linguistic system. And
it would have been very hard for someone to just make up on the spot as they were doing it.
Right, exactly. Of course, it's possible that some of this stuff could happen unconsciously, that, somebody could be in an altered state and create something like that. But I guess the important thing is, does it work? And, do people receive visions that help them to understand their life? Yes, and I think that that's kind of what happened with Crowley, and I think that it helped to elaborate on the system of Thelema that he had received, so...
Didn't he also believe himself to be a reincarnation of one of them?
Yes, Edward Kelly. He believed that Edward Kelly was his, I guess you could say, precarnation, and Edward Kelly was John Dee's assistant. Crowley also believed he was the reincarnation of Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia. There's a Showtime series about him recently too. And I think that and Crowley talks about reincarnation a little bit in his writings, and he kind of goes back and forth as to whether or not he really believes in reincarnation. But I think that kind of where he finally lands is, it doesn't matter whether he's really a reincarnation of these people or not, that somehow he identifies with these people, and that tells him something about himself.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to bring up also involving Victor Newberg was the whole Khoronzon incident in the desert.
Oh, sure, right. Yeah, Aleister Crowley evoking Khoronzon.
Now, who is Khoronzon?
Khoronzon is... it's kind of like what you would imagine the personification of reason and rationality taken to the utmost extreme, where every possible idea is completely analyzed to the point of destruction, so that when you imagine, like, I think that Facebook is a great manifestation of Khoronzon in some ways. Like, it's just the constant babbling of the ego and everything that's just rationalizes everything, and tries to take everything mysterious and turn it into some kind of egotistical or rational understanding. And that's kind of the angel that is associated with the abyss on the tree of life, the Kabbalistic tree of life. The abyss is the sort of the false Sephiroth that exists between the supernal triad and the rest of the tree, which is sort of the personal ego and personality of the individual. The supernal triad being sort of the more divine realms. Thoth is the kind of the abyss that separates these two, and Khoronzon is said to live right there in the abyss, ready to tear apart every ego that passes through.
And now, when they did this, they went out to the desert for this, I believe. And,
that's right. Yeah.
It's not exactly clear what happened, is it?
No, it's not. I guess Crowley chronicles what he saw and what Victor Newberg was doing, but it's it's unclear what actually happened.
And didn't Victor get attacked one way or another?
Right. That's the depiction is that Victor Newberg was attacked, and that Aleister Crowley, using all of his might, overcame Khoronzon and saved Victor Newberg.
Okay. Has anyone ever died working with Crowley in one of these rituals?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No. I think the only death that I know of that is attached to Crowley was Crowley had that abbey of Thelema in Italy, where they were basically living. It was like a commune. They were living. They had goats, and they were living on the land. And Raoul Loveday went and drank from a stream that Crowley warned him against, and he died of what I don't remember what the. He got some kind of bug from drinking that water. But then, his Raoul Loveday's, I think his wife or somebody told the press that that Crowley had forced him to drink cat blood or something like that, and it wasn't true. So yeah.
Well, actually, this is a good time to address some of his more notorious elements. First of all, you're on WVBR FM Ithaca. We're talking to Joseph Thebus here on Where'd the Road Go, and we're gonna cover a couple more things before we end the show here. There was, of course, the incident where he cooked some menstrual blood into cakes.
Oh, well, that's that is the cakes of light, which are the recipe is in the Book of the Law, and that is the sort of like the communion bread that is for Thelema, and it involves you mix honey and meal and abramelin oil, and you use some form of blood, and the Book of the Law mentions the various kinds of blood that you can mix in with that, and it does say that the best blood is of the moon monthly, which is interpreted to mean menstrual blood. Of course, it's just, I think it's just a little bit that's put in there, and in modern practice, because the Book of the Law says this burn and of this make cakes, people have interpreted that to mean that that you actually make a cake that has the blood in it, and then you burn that, and then you put that ash into a new batch, and that's where the sort of the blood comes from, and it's symbolic of the life of and the joy of the earth, and that's including with the honey and the grain and the oil. All of those things are sort of products of the earth and life of the earth. And that's all goes into the making of cakes of light, which is then consumed, and it's the symbolism is that's the lower life feeding the higher life.
Okay. And often what I'll hear is that he baked fecal matter into cakes and fed it to people unsuspecting, and I'm pretty sure that is where they take that off of it, just corrupt it to the point where it becomes something else.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think he would tell people if he was feeding them fecal matter, and that it would be like, some kind of ordeal that they had to go through in order to attain some spiritual state, rather than doing it secretly. He would tell them what they were doing so that they would freak out, and then they would go into an altered state of consciousness.
Well, that's one of the many rumors that I've heard, and I think Bruce actually tries to put that forth on the horrible Crowley movie too.
Oh, okay, yeah. I hadn't heard that one, but yeah, sometimes I hear myths and I'm like, I don't know if that's true or not. I'd have to go look. That doesn't sound likely to me, but I haven't actually heard it before, so I've never actually looked into it specifically. But it doesn't seem like what he would do.
Right. So, there was also an incident with a goat.
Oh, sure, yeah. He wanted to have Leah Hirsig have sex with the goat, and then I believe the plan was that he would then sacrifice the goat while the goat was having sex with Leah. But the goat wasn't really up to the task, so Crowley just sacrificed it. And I imagine they all ate because they, like I say, that was when they were living in a really kind of commune kind of situation, and he didn't have a lot of money at the time. I don't think he would have wasted an entire goat, so I think he probably then cooked it and everybody ate it. I don't remember if that actually was documented, but that's what I imagine happened.
Okay.
So,
and aren't there like rumors that worse things with the goat happened or something?
I think that there are rumors that Crowley had sex with the goat.
Okay, maybe that was it.
But I don't, he wanted the goat to have sex with Leah, and then it wouldn't, so he killed it.
And what was his rationale behind that?
I think he was just experimenting. He was somebody who experimented with all manner of ritual, sex magic, drugs, anything. He wanted to try it and see how it affected things, and so he probably wanted to see, whether sex with an animal could produce some kind of magical effect.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's my guess.
Now, his view of women was a little bit odd.
Well, he was very conflicted about women, and I think that it's no secret that he definitely wrote disparaging things about women. He also, I think he did consider himself a feminist. He said so, and I think that his philosophy and certainly the religion that he founded are very feminist in their orientation, in the sense that Thelema really establishes that every man and every woman is, at their essence, at their core, identical, in the sense that we all have that divine spark within us. Every man, as the phrase goes in the Book of the Law, every man and every woman is a star. And Crowley wrote in much more radical terms than I think anyone in his time about the sovereignty of every woman and their right to do their own will. And he argued for, establishing welfare for mothers so that they would not be dependent on men. And he worked with women also. He had women who were working with magic with him, and who were doing a lot of administrative work in the order, and held the highest ranks in his orders. So I really think that Crowley saw women as, at their essence, being exactly the same as men. But I think what he hated was the way that sort of Victorian era women were taught to behave, and at that time women were very much treated as chattel, as property. Marriage at that time, even as now, was thought of as a kind of almost an exchange of property between the father and the husband, the new husband. And so I think that Crowley really saw the education system and the society that he lived in as one that corrupted women away from their real natures to becoming the kind of woman that he despised, which I think a lot of that was caught up in the relationship he had with his mother and so forth. I mean, he was a psychologically complex individual, to be sure. Yeah. And his idea of women was also complex. But I think that when you look at if you look at his sort of diary entries, you'll see a lot more kind of misogynist kinds of things, versus where he's writing sort of philosophically about what he really believes. There you see a lot more strong and radical feminism coming through.
Okay. One of his other statements is love under will, love is the law. And what exactly, how does that translate simply, as best you can?
Sure. I would say, first of all, it's the idea that it overturns the idea that we should love at all costs. That first of all, when we love, we have to be loving in accord with our own nature. And that's kind of what I think is meant by love under will, that we love in a way that is in accord with our own nature, rather than in a way that meets other people's expectations. I think that's one of the most important aspects of that. Also, I think the idea of love under will implies sort of the second half of the formula of attainment, the first half being that we find our inmost nature and manifest that, the do what thou wilt part. And then love is the law, love under will, means that once we really have found ourselves and are manifesting our inmost nature, the next thing that we have to do is seek to unite with every other phenomena in the universe. And that's this idea of, first we find ourselves, that's the will part, and then through that, we experience union with the entire universe, and that's the love part. And interestingly, in the Greek alphabet, when you look at the word for love, Agapé, and the word for will, Thelema, they both add up to the same number, 93. And that's something you'll hear Thelemites say to each other, 93. And it's a greeting, and it means both do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will.
And this is also under the phrase current 93.
Oh, Current 93 is a band, right? They're the band,
yeah.
And that idea of the 93 current, or it's sort of this idea of a stream or egregore of consciousness that is identified with the will and love dichotomy, and Current 93 was a band which actually has the song called Crowley Mass.
Which we're going to hear at the conclusion of this interview.
Oh, that was a good little segue then, huh? Nice.
And they were very heavily inspired by Crowley.
Definitely. David Tibet is still heavily inspired by Crowley. I think he's not a Thelemite, but he definitely has been at some point in his life, and he's definitely remains very influenced by Crowley. So,
all right, and the numbers that all breaks down to gematria, and that's an ancient Hebrew mysticism.
Right. I think medieval. I don't think it goes to the ancient times, but yes, it's a kind of a numerology. It's basically I think the Hebrew gematria kind of came from the Greeks originally, and the Greeks were the ones who had it in ancient times. But yeah, it's basically you assign a number to each letter of the alphabet, which the Hebrew alphabet already had the numerical attributions inherently, as did the Greek, because the letters served as numbers for those civilizations. And so the idea being that if you have two words that add up to the same value, that they must have some kind of symbolic relationship to each other. Those two words do. And likewise, you can make you can take a sentence and then use the initial letters from the sentence to create another word, and then find the value of that word. And it's a whole tradition that goes back to Pythagoras, really, but was really used heavily by the Jews and the Christians in the medieval time, and I think in the Renaissance. Yeah, in the Renaissance, there's a lot more of the Christian use of Kabbalah and gematria, and they used it really to argue a lot for their interpretation of the Bible, because they would take verses from the Bible and add them up, and then say, well, this also adds up to the same number as this other phrase, and therefore, Jesus was the Son of God, or something like that. So they kind of used it as evidence to argue their interpretation of Scripture. But also, it's been used by magicians and sorcerers to create magical formulas and encode magical secrets.
Okay. If you were to describe Crowley to somebody, how would you do it?
Oh man, I guess I would say he was an early 20th century British occultist, chess player, mountain climber, and probably the greatest philosopher of the last 12,000 years.
All right. Well, he was also a hell of a trickster too, wasn't he?
That's true. He was.
All right. You co-produce a podcast, correct?
Yes, it's called The Speech in the Silence, Speech in the Silence, and that's at speechinthesilence.com, and it's all Thelema all the time. So we have little half-hour talks and music and announcements and news that all has to do with Thelema or Aleister Crowley or Order Templi Orientis or AA. It all has to do with all that stuff. So I think it's it's one of the few podcasts out there that have that kind of focus, and it's becoming more popular all the time. We just had 6,000 downloads in September. So
nice. Anything else that you should that people can go to look at that involves you?
Oh, I guess if people, not necessarily involving me, but if people are interested in reading the works of Aleister Crowley, there's some stuff online. If you go to oto-usa.org. They have, if you go to the library there, the online library, there's a number of texts that have been proofread. Also, the Aleister Crowley fan page on Facebook, that's something that I helped to run. And that has, just today, it's reached 77,000 likes.
Nice.
And we try to post there once or twice a day. Sometimes more, with quotes and pictures and links to books that are coming out and things like that. So anybody that wants to know more about Crowley or kind of tune in to the current 93, so to speak, they can get on that Aleister Crowley page on Facebook.
Do you know what the extension for it is?
Let's see. It's facebook.com/Aleister.Crowley.page.
Oh, okay. Easy enough.
Yep, and I guess the hardest part of that is learning to spell Aleister, which is
Yes.
A-L-E-I-S-T-E-R.
Oh, all right. And before I let you go, you had posted something interesting to your own personal Facebook about multiple worlds.
Oh, something about multiple worlds. Oh, that was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. It was about if we live in multiple worlds. If this multiple world theory is correct, which is that every time a decision is made, another universe is spawned off.
Right.
And this is something that some physicists are seriously putting out there. And you had thought, what if we only are conscious of the one where we don't die?
Right. Yeah, because I was thinking about this. This is the many worlds interpretation of the of quantum mechanics. Is this idea that quantum states, or you have the wave function, which indicates the location of a subatomic particle, and that is a probability function, and that it can be two places at once and that kind of thing. It's where we get the Schrodinger's cat argument and things like that. So my thinking was, okay, so if this many worlds interpretation is correct and a new universe is formed for every possible arrangement of subatomic particles, then I don't experience the one where I die. And so maybe every single one of us will live forever in our own universe.
Or at least to the oldest possible state.
Right, exactly. But what is that old? I mean, maybe. But I think if anything's possible, then it seems that we could potentially, our cells could fail to die, or what, I don't know. But it just seems like it was an interesting kind of thought experiment. And I guess some of the comments in the thread, some people said that there were some physicists who've come up with the same thought, and I have yet to go dig into that to see what they say. But yeah, it seems to me like...
well, if that interpretation is correct, we're all alive and dead in different worlds at the same time, so...
Right, exactly.
It's something I've wondered about as well, because you don't know that are you familiar at all with the Seth work? Jane Roberts?
Vaguely.
Seth had always said that there were, these infinite number of worlds, but we don't all inhabit the same one. Some of them are probable realities to us, but prime realities to other people.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I think actually somebody might have mentioned that as a response to my post. So I think I recall somebody mentioning Seth, but I didn't look into it. So I'll definitely look into it now. That's
all right. And of course, there's also the Aleister Crowley 2012 page is still up, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. ac2012.com, and you can find a link on that website to the Facebook page, and there's lots of stuff on the website. There's pictures, and some models even took photographs of themselves wearing Aleister Crowley 2012 gear and sent it in, and we posted that up on there, and there's lots of little articles, and there's several that have top 10 myths about Aleister Crowley and that kind of stuff. A lot of funny stuff on there. So, in fact, just the other day at school, somebody approached me and asked me if I was the AC 2012 guy. That's the first time that's happened to me. So I guess the site is making the rounds now in 2013.
And you're keeping it up, right?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it up there. I don't really have time to run a 2016 campaign, but I figure I'll leave this one up. And if anybody wants to copy and paste the work on there and make a 2016 site, that's fine by me. But I'll leave it up there, and maybe occasionally I'll have additional content to put up, but I being a student, I'm not going to have time to run a campaign this time.
Right. So. All right. Well, I thank you. This has been another fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, and I really appreciate being called back. And of course, I'm happy to come back anytime if you like.
All right, absolutely. Now we're going to hear Current 93 with HOH doing Crowley Mass.
Excellent. 93.
Now this is a remix of the original Current 93 song.
Oh yeah, and it's better. I think the original is a little every recording I've heard was kind of it was hard to hear. This one's better.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you, Joseph. And Last Exit for the Lost is up next. Here's Current 93 and HOH with Crowley Mass.